right. Thank you all for joining the Nature Conservancy's webinar, Saving the Himalayan Brown Bear, with presenter Seema Paul, Managing Director of our India program. Welcome, everyone. My name is Catherine Rondinaro, and I am the Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations with the California chapter. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Seema for almost the past 10 years, both in our roles now and in previous positions. And just last year, I had the pleasure, along with about 10 of our colleagues, of visiting the central Indian highlands with Seema to learn more about our India program. And we were spending time thinking about ways to engage you all more in this work. So I'm so glad that she will be presenting on saving the Himalayan brown bear this morning. Seema will introduce herself in just a moment, but first I want to thank everyone for joining us under the incredibly difficult circumstances in the world today. We really appreciate your interest in TNC as an organization and your interest in today's webinar on some of our really interesting work around the world. Over the last few months, we've been doing our best to keep you informed about the work through our webinar series, The Determining Decade. This first round of webinars that we just completed, featuring projects run out of the California chapter, are recorded and can be found at a link in the invitation that we sent out for the series. Now, we're excited to conclude our second series of global programs where we touched on our Africa, China, India, and Latin America work. Please use your invitation link to view recordings of any webinars you may have missed or would like to revisit. After Seema's presentation, we'll have a Q&A with all participants. If you would like to ask a question, just hover over that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. We'll compile the questions and answer as many as we have time for. If we're unable to answer your question, we will follow up by email. Thank you so much for your participation and for your interest. Now I'd like to turn it over to Seema. Seema, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and explain what you and your team are doing to aid.
I come from a family of wanderers. My great-grandparents lived in the Mediterranean region of Europe. And in the 16th century, they came to India along with Muslim invaders. They stayed back and chose to settle down in a small town called Peshawar, which is on the borders between Afghanistan and what is today Pakistan. My grandfather had a very strong interest in study of religions. In Peshawar, he pursued his interest, and in that context, he used to ask a lot of questions about Islam, which unfortunately the Muslim priests did not appreciate. So my grandfather was dubbed a kafir or a rebel, and he chose then to come to what is North India. Here he converted to Hinduism. His oldest son went on to become a Christian missionary. A daughter married a Sikh, another religion. My dad, the youngest in the family, converted or stayed with Hinduism, which his father had converted to. Eventually, my father's life journey brought him to California. And last November, he passed away peacefully in California with his 5 daughters by his bedside. My forefathers and my father's journey across 3 continents, from the Mediterranean to India to California or North America, has taught me that we all share but one planet, and that rather than being attached to a country or a place or a religion, my attachment is to this planet Earth. And my eventual aspiration and what gives me the motivation from day to day, it revolves around spiritualism, which is so different from religion and which is so connected with nature. Having decided early in life that what I really cared for was the earth and the environment, I'm really fortunate to be working for the Nature Conservancy, which works on the environment across 70 countries and across all 50 states in the United States. So with that, could we have the next slide? The topic for today is saving the Himalayan brown bear. But to get started, I'll speak to the broader context in which this initiative is being located. Some of you, or perhaps all of you, are familiar with the fact that the Nature Conservancy has been focused on 4 global priorities, which are here before you. Next slide, please. As the COVID-19 pandemic has struck the world and economic recession is ongoing, different organizations have chosen to respond in different ways. Our organization has chosen to take a very strategic view of things and has decided that we will streamline our work around 2 global outcomes: healthy oceans, fresh water and lands, and climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Next slide, please. With this, let me turn to India. And let me speak to why TNC chose to be in India. It was 5 years ago that our board of directors finally decided that we needed to be in India. India is the 6th most biodiverse country in the world. Therefore, it is intrinsically important for any global conservation organization to be in India. However, because of its geological history, India has some very unique flora and fauna. So if you look, if you can turn this video on, you will find that India was a landmass joined with Africa, and then it floated across and went and joined the Asian landmass. As a result of this, India has unique wildlife that is found in Africa as well as in Asia. So for example, we have the lion, which perhaps you don't know is also found in India, not just Africa. And we also have the tiger in India. And we are the only country which has both of these big cats. And when you saw that the Indian landmass was floating, that was for a very long period that it floated before joining the Asia region. As a result of that long period of isolation, India also has extremely endemic species that are not found anywhere else in the world. But beyond the intrinsic biodiversity value, there are other reasons to be in India. India has a very large population, 1.3 billion people, and still growing. It also has a very ambitious economic agenda. And all of this means that India and how India will grow has implications for global sustainability. For example, India is one of the among the top 5 emitters of greenhouse gases that are driving climate change. So TNC's planetary level ambition requires that we be in India and that we succeed. Next slide, please. Since starting our work here 5 years ago, we have made significant strides. We have 9 initiatives that are underway, aligned with the 4 agendas and the 2 outcome areas that I laid out earlier. Next slide, please. We also have 28 talented staff people who love to enjoy themselves, as you can see in this picture. Many of them are women, majority of them, in fact, are women. Next slide, please. Often people in the United States ask me if it is possible to succeed in India. My response most often is that India is one of the most remarkable and under-recognized success stories in conservation. Take the tiger again as an example. I referenced the tiger earlier. The tiger's range once extended from Iran, or what was once called Persia, up to the Russian Far East. Today, India is perhaps the only country where the tiger has a healthy chance for survival. In 2006, India's tiger numbers had come down to around 1,400. With concerted efforts, when the count was last taken in 2019, the numbers had doubled and are today at 3,000. India's land density is 11 times that of the United States. It also has a very high population of people who are extremely poor. And yet, India has managed to not only retain a lot of its biodiversity, it's among the 10th most forested countries in the world. This is an illustration, a humorous illustration of some of the wildlife that's found in India.
Exactly.
Next slide.
I can't see the slides or anything. Okay, I'm listening
To bolster your confidence that success at scale is indeed possible, let me cite an example of our own win, or TNC's win in India. Just in February this year, the government of India announced the world's largest ecological fiscal transfer. 12 billion US dollars will be given away to states based on their dense forest cover. This is a very significant signal to the states that they need to retain their green cover for themselves, for the benefit of the country, and for the planetary health. This critical step has been made possible by 18 months of rigorous effort by team TNC-India, supported by a number of our colleagues around the world. And one of them is Catherine Rondinaro, who is on this webinar, who introduced me, and also Anita Schwartz, another colleague of mine who is also on this webinar today. This critical success is a key step in our efforts to help India achieve its Paris climate commitment goal. One of that goal is to sequester 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon by 2030 through reforestation. And this particular win will aid that goal. Next slide, please. So you can tell that as we are completing 5 years in India, we are getting into our stride. So we thought it was time for us to conceive our 10th initiative, a wildlife-centric initiative. This particular initiative involves brown bears, a species that is found across North America, as you know, but also in Europe, China, and India. When I left California to assume charge in New Delhi, I was aware that while the Californian flag carried or honored the brown bear, it was no longer to be found in the wilds of my state. When I had first learned this, I had really felt a little ache in my heart. On the positive side, I was aware that my colleagues, such as Chris Bryant, who heads our Montana chapter, were carrying out extraordinary work to preserve the brown bear in Wyoming, in Washington, in Alaska, and Canada, besides Montana. Chris Bryant is today also guiding our efforts in India to preserve the brown bear. Next slide, please. Imagine my delight when I first learned during a session with my gym trainer that India had brown bears. I had not known it. India has so much wildlife. I had not known about brown bears. I knew there were other bears in India, but not the brown bear. I was so excited on learning that because I thought what I had lost in California, perhaps I could regain in the Himalayan region of India. I really felt an emotional high that day, and I started researching. Next slide, please. Not just me, several of my colleagues also started researching. We were all very excited that this might be the start of a new initiative, a wildlife-centric initiative. We soon learned that India had 500 brown bears in the trans-Himalayan and Western Himalayan region of India. They live across 4,300 square kilometers of alpine and subalpine habitats. The Himalayan region is a global biodiversity hotspot. It's also a last chance ecosystem. What that means is that this region is critical for preventing species extinction, and it is also underrepresented in the global protected area network. My team members and I felt supremely charged. Besides my own high, which was connected to the fact that I was so sorry that in California we had lost the bear, I think my team members were really inspired by what TNC has done for the brown bear across North America. And we felt that if we worked on the brown bear, we would be leveraging our strength and our learnings from across the United States. The more we learned about the brown bear, the more fascinated we were. The brown bear lives alongside some of the other species that you see here, which includes the snow leopards, the western trangopans, kiangs, pikas, monal pheasants, and much more. I invite you to visit the Himalayan landscape one day. It's one of the most fascinating places in the world. There are rocky, jagged mountains, near vertical slopes, and crystal clear lakes. This is a landscape where Buddhism still thrives in its place of birth. You'll find shrines and temples in the most obscure corners, a land that attracts those very special tourists who care for the unique expressions of culture that only occur because the rarest of rare biodiversity has allowed them to. Next slide, please. Let's watch a short video of the Himalayan brown bear.
It's been a long and cold winter in one of the coldest places in India. As it slowly gets warmer, signs of a very special animal that's out there begin to appear. The Himalayan brown bear. She has just woken up from a long hibernation and has only one thing on her mind: food. Bears are mostly solitary, apart from females with cubs. Amazingly, cubs are born during this hibernation while the mother is still asleep. They've managed to find an area with less snow. Here, they can dig for roots and grasses. As omnivores, they're ready to eat almost anything and always looking for a meal. But there's always time for play. Bear cubs will stay with their mother for up to 3 years, learning, eating, and growing. They will spend the rest of summer fattening themselves up till it's almost winter and they're ready to hibernate once again. Unfortunately, there is a growing conflict between people and bears as they compete for limited space and resources. Villages have become scavenging opportunities, and bears will often even kill livestock. Each night, people lock all doors and windows and hang empty cans and drums, which work as an alarm system. They then begin scanning the mountainsides for bears. Over the last few years, the incidents of conflict have only increased. The situation is dangerous for both bears and people. For now, there have been no human casualties.
So that did end on a positive note, but you saw and heard the danger that lurks there. And while the brown bear and the human communities are locked in conflict, the source of the conflict is one, and it is the degradation of the land. So the growing human population in this Ladakh region, combined with poor agricultural and herding practices and topped by climate change, is what is driving the landscape degradation. And this, coupled with some of the food waste disposal habits of the local communities, is giving rise to the conflict, which often results for humans in loss of property, cattle, homes, and even lives. So the solutions that will be needed to address this challenge will need to be multi-layered. In our journey to advance the work, we will start by addressing the human-bear conflict rather than address the land degradation itself. It's very important for us to get alignment with the communities, to get their buy-in and support. Once we reduce the pressure on the human population of this conflict, then they will be willing to engage on the deeper challenges that need to be addressed. So next slide, please. Our point of entry is going to be a community guardians program. The guardians will be inspired youth who will engage with their own communities. They will seek to influence the food practices and other practices that could prevent human-bear conflict. They'll also collect data on bear sightings, interactions, and all that will be very useful because not very much information is available on this species. And we want to ensure that our program is scientifically designed. The other thing that the community guardians will do is to enable the government's compensation scheme wherein people are compensated for loss of life or cattle. That scheme is more effective. Right now, the delivery of the scheme is extremely poor. And as we begin to succeed, we will start addressing the underlying issues of land degradation. One of the other things that we wish to do is to expand the protected area network and strengthen it. Because of climate change, the habitat of the bear does not fall, and other wildlife species as well, does not fall within the current protected area network. So the network needs to be expanded. The corridors between the protected areas need to be also strengthened, and that's another level of work that we will carry out over time. And in all of this work, we will ensure, as TNC always does, that we practice the best of science and that we also practice the best of community rights standards. So next slide, please. Our ultimate goal is to secure the brown bear population, which is currently estimated at 500. We will begin small, be sure to succeed, and then we will grow our program. And you might be wondering what's going to be unique about our approach. I think what we have already established as unique about our approach is the fact that we have brought all stakeholders together. Even in conceiving this program, we've had the government, the civil society, the scientific institutions, the community representatives, and ecotourism business operators on the drawing board with us. So bringing all of these voices and knowledge streams together is what will make us very strong. We are also trying to galvanize the pride and understanding of the community itself. We will employ them as guardians and try to give them a stream of funding. And eventually we expect to make them self-sustaining by also promoting ecotourism. Once COVID is over, that's the time that we will get to the ecotourism aspect of the work. We feel very confident that we can succeed in this land of spirituality. We envision that we will learn from the past and present and help the communities build a better future for themselves as well as for nature. And it shouldn't be really that hard because this area is a Buddhist region and the people and the cultures, they are pretty non-violent. Next slide, please. So here's our action plan. We are already in phase 1. We were in phase 1 even before COVID arrived. We were contemplating this program in 3 phases, but now we have introduced a second phase, which is really about winning the confidence of the community by helping them address COVID-19. The health infrastructure in the Himalayan region is extremely poor, and the community's livelihoods are very much affected because they don't have the necessary health gear, whether it is the PEPs for the health workers, but also they do not have the masks or the sanitizers. So that's, I think, the first order of business for us, to get them these supplies. The local communities are grappling with so much, the loss of livelihoods, and then also the, the health challenges. In terms of livelihoods, I just want to mention that majority of them depend on the ecotourism, which has stalled. A portion of the community is herders. If any one of you has ever worn the Pashmina shawl or heard of it, it comes from this region. The herders take the cattle, the goats up into the upper reaches where they have very nutritious access to nutritious grasses and foods, and that's what really fattens these cattle. It also means that they are able to produce more wool when they come back. But right now the herders are not able to get out or earn their living through the work that they do. So we also want to reach out to these herders and start engaging with them now. This will pay back even in terms of narrow project goals, because it is a confidence boosting measure. Then by fall, we expect that the situation will be better. And that's when we will start our community engagement and community guardians program. We will choose young, inspired youth and train them to be guardians. These youth will act as a go-between the government compensation scheme and the local communities. They will also try to improve their food disposal practices and do much more. And then finally, we will be looking at scaling up beyond the initial years. Our need at this time for the confidence building measures is around $50,000, and to launch the Community Guardians program around $225,000. Next slide, please. So here are the key takeaways. We must protect this last chance ecosystem. Next one, please. We must prevent the human-bear conflict, and it's possible to do it. Next, please. We must promote sustainable livelihoods for these communities. And with that, I would like to make a personal statement. Californians, I'm a Californian. I count myself as a Californian. I live there. I have a home there. Californians love startups. It's a very strong startup culture. This is our startup initiative in India. It's about the brown bear. And I really want to share a personal message that I feel in this story that I have experienced in traveling from California to the Himalayas. And that is that I think that the Himalayan brown bear is really telling us that the world is one. That's what I think the grizzly's cousin is telling us. And I hope that I've been able to convey that message to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Seema, for that incredibly powerful message. and for sharing the highlight and the overview of the work that truly does connect us across California, across the ocean to India and beyond. I'll encourage everyone now to keep those questions coming in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, that Q&A, if you could type those questions in there. We do have a few to start. Let's start with that question of the cousin of the grizzly. Can you tell us a little bit more about whether this is the same species as the brown bear in California? Is it the grizzly that we're talking about? Give us a little bit more background on that.
Sure. So it is the same species, and this is the Himalayan brown bear is a subspecies of the same species. So not very much difference, just you know, the color is different, but very much the same species.
And what's the main food source? It looks like a very sparse landscape.
Yeah, the main, I mean, they are omnivores, so they eat both fruits, roots, but they also eat fish. So they have a varied diet, but they do have to work hard. And because the waste disposal habits can make them turn to that easy food. You know, all of us creatures are lazy. If we get lazy ways out, we look for them, and so does the brown bear.
Thank you. And are the Himalayan brown bears found in any of India's neighbors, or do the Himalaya form an impenetrable barrier?
No, they do travel across these 500 brown bears. As I said, you know, the world is one. They're not only telling California that, they do travel across to Nepal, Bhutan region as well. So it's a shared, you know, they travel across borders.
And are those connectivity corridors things that we are looking to protect as part of that protected areas network?
Yes, India's protected areas tend to be very, very small. I mean, because of that land density that I referenced earlier. The Himalayan region is less densely populated, but even so, the corridors are going to be vitally important to secure the bear population. Climate change only makes the challenge harder because the regions, the ecoregions are shifting, and the kind of terrain that the brown bear prefers is moving upwards, and so will the brown bear be forced to migrate. And that calls for more expansive protected areas. So we will have to work with the government to either expand the protected area network or to really promote better options for livelihoods in the corridors so that they are friendly for both people as well as for the brown bear and the other species as well. I mean, there's the snow leopard, there are many other species as well.
Excellent. We've got a number of questions related to what you were just talking about. So let's start with the climate change question first and connectivity. What degree of warming can the bears survive, and how much impact does that actually have on the connectivity corridors that we're paying attention to?
I'm not a scientist, I'm a policy wonk, and I don't have the answer to that question, but I can get you that. It is what I've been informed by Dr. Satya Kumar, who's the scientist on our team from Wildlife Institute of India, is that expanding there is enough scope to expand the protected area network in ways that the climate challenge can be overcome by the brown bear and the other species. It requires a lot of political will to do so. And that's what we will have to work. It requires getting alignment with the communities so that they are supportive. And that's when the politicians also align with you. So that's why we want to begin by first alleviating the pressure on the local communities that they're immediately feeling, which is from the conflicts and loss of property. And that's the entry point for a longer term engagement that will tackle the bigger challenges around land degradation and climate change.
Excellent. So thinking of those policies, does India have laws similar to the US Endangered Species Act that can be used to protect the bears?
Yes, indeed. India has a similar law, and it was actually, passed by Indian Parliament a year before the US law for wildlife protection was passed. Now, there are challenges to the implementation of that law. That's always the case. And that's where the role of civil society and organizations like TNC and our partners comes in. And we expect to play that role effectively. We have just a great consortium of partners working with us. We have the Snow Leopard Conservancy, Wildlife Institute of India, which is a government of India body. We have Roots Ladakh, which is an ecotourism company. We have the conservator of forests from Ladakh partnering with us. That is a government, very senior government official. So we've brought all stakeholders together, and we expect that we will succeed.
That's excellent. Thank you. What is the main source of income and livelihood for the communities in the region? And I know we spoke a little bit about ecotourism, but what's the overall picture?
So largely they practice agriculture, and it's just like basic living agriculture. They don't get much cash out of it. For cash, they turn to ecotourism jobs. And that's the industry that has been, so badly affected right now. That's their cash economy. And essentially, handicrafts is another source of income, which is also dependent on ecotourism. They have some very beautiful handicrafts in that region. I mentioned the Pashmina shawl, but there is much more that region offers. And helping to develop that handicrafts and the ecotourism and the handicrafts industry would also be an area of work for us.
So it sounds like these communities who are living on subsistence agriculture have been there for a long time. Are the problems more coming about? You talked about waste disposal. Are there other expansion problems that we're thinking about? Is it a type of sprawl situation? Have the agricultural practices actually changed through that subsistence practice? And how are we incorporating all of that thinking and all of those inputs into our response and our engagement with the community?
Sure. So, in India, agriculture expansion was a major threat for the forests and for the important protected areas in the past. But now the bigger threat is infrastructure development. India in 2015 told the Conference of Parties to the Climate Convention that the India of 2030, 75% of it will be built between 2015 and 30. So a lot of infrastructure is coming up. And Catherine, you saw that as we traveled from Satpura back to Bhopal to catch that weird flight. So,
Yes,
so that infrastructure is a major threat. And there, TNC has done excellent work in the Mojave Desert around using a methodology called development by design, where we've been able to recommend to the state how it can achieve its solar infrastructure goals and wind infrastructure goals while avoiding the ecologically sensitive areas. So we will bring the same approach to India. We've started on that journey in another geography in India, but we will be utilizing the same approach to work with the government to show them solutions that are possible, in which the infrastructure development as well as the ecology can coexist, and balanced solutions are pursued.
that's helpful. Thank you. Tell me a little bit, and this is a question I don't know the answer to, and I wish I did, but are we able to acquire land for conservation in India as we do in the US? What are the laws? Is that one of our opportunities for this protection work?
In fact, it is not. I think that the law does not allow foreign organizations to acquire land. Land is also very difficult to acquire in India for conservation purposes. You know, it's a very contested commodity because the land the human population living on that land mass is so high. The land density is 11 times that of the United States and growing. And so it's a very, very costly commodity as well. So firstly, the law doesn't allow, but I remember Bill Gain, our former chief conservation officer who was with me in India once, we were calculating the cost of buying land for conservation purposes in India, just as an exercise. And it was so much costlier than anything we would purchase in Chile or wherever. So the return on investment won't be very high either for TNC.
That's super interesting. You mentioned the population. Is India as a country addressing the need for human population stabilization effectively? And is access to birth control increasing and cultural desire to limit family size increasing?
Yes, all of those trends are positive, Catherine. That's the good news. But there are parts of India where much more work needs to be done. A few states in North India in particular have been challenging states. Mm-hmm. And there are organizations like the Gates Foundation that are addressing it in a human rights centric approach, where they are empowering women, their access to, birth control is improved, their access to health, more than just birth control. Women need holistic health, access to holistic health. And that's what is being worked upon by a number of concerted actors, and Gates is one of them. The government of India is also playing a major role itself.
That's really helpful to understand. Switching gears just a little bit here, we talked a bit about our partners. Who are we working with as key partners on the ground on issues like the brown bear and some of the other issues that you mentioned in your presentation?
Yeah, so on the brown bears, I mentioned that one of our key partners will be the Snow Leopard Conservancy India Trust. They used to be part of the Snow Leopard Conservancy Fund, the global one. They've registered themselves independently in India now. The person who leads this organization is a marvelous man. He is from Ladakh. He did his master's in wildlife biology in one of the Nordic countries, and then he did his PhD in wildlife ecology. He's the first person from Ladakh to have a PhD in wildlife ecology. He worked for the US Geological Survey in California and chose to go back to serve not just India, to serve Ladakh. And he leads the Snow Leopard Conservancy Fund. Such a humble man, I mean, very inspiring. He's our on-the-ground partner. There's another ecotourism company which is also working with local communities to improve their livelihoods. That's called Roots Ladakh. They are another partner. We are also working with a university in Himachal Pradesh with a professor who's working on this issue as an academic. Then I mentioned the Wildlife Institute of India. They are another partner. Dr. Satya Kumar is the brown bear expert at that institute, which is part of the government's Ministry of Environment. They are another partner. And then there is another NGO called National Conservation Foundation, NCF, Nature Conservation Foundation, NCF. They do wonderful work, and they're led by very passionate researchers. So they are another partner for us. So we have quite a few partners that we have brought around the table, and they get along extremely well. Oftentimes you'll bring partners and you're left trying to sort issues out and make them work cohesively. This partnership has just been cohesive from day one. And we were wondering why that may be the case. And we all decided amongst ourselves that it is because the brown bear is so neglected that we needed to do something about it. And we are very excited that together we can do something.
That is excellent. I love that. And Seema, I've known you to bring together some mighty coalitions and collaborations, so I expect nothing less. But it does lead me to the next question. Is it truly because they are so underprotected that we've chosen to protect the brown bear over so many other charismatic species in India?
So we are choosing the brown bear as an entry point. If we protect the brown bear, it's an indicator species. It means that we are protecting the health of the entire landscape, which means that other wildlife can also thrive there. And we chose the brown bear as our entry point because we have done work on brown bear across North America. And there's so much that we can learn from that work. We can leverage our strength in that fashion. So I think it's important for TNC to come with something unique to the table. And here we are bringing unique knowledge of the brown bear to the table in India.
Thank you. Has the number of brown bears actually been relatively small always, or has the number greatly reduced as the lower lands become unavailable and due to those conflicts?
The numbers have definitely declined over time. That's true for all populations in India, but I think 500 is still quite a stable number. There is a fighting chance for this species to survive and thrive. We don't expect that the numbers may grow dramatically, but yes, there can be some improvements in the number. So for us, the more important goal is to secure the 500 that we have, and then to begin to grow them as well. But that, may be a slow process to grow them.
That makes sense. Are there national parks in which the brown bears live and thrive and are protected that we're connecting to?
Yes, there are a number of protected areas where the brown bear lives. But as I mentioned, they are pretty small, and because of the climate change, the size, and the location is an issue. So either we need them to be expanded in order for the climate issue to be addressed effectively as far as the brown bear is concerned.
And with that protected areas network, do we have a goal for the number of acres or hectares of protected area that we'd like to see in India, or linkages? What's our prioritization based on?
So the prioritization will be based on the survival of the species, what is needed to survive. And we'll do the science to determine that. And that will provide us a solid case to go to the government. One of the other instruments we want to leverage is the World Heritage nominations process. UNESCO, the UN body, UNESCO, has a World Heritage Center, and many of you would have visited World Heritage sites. They come in cultural categories, but there is also a biodiversity category under which World Heritage sites can be nominated. And they have also a category in which you can nominate a cluster of sites and not just single protected area. So when you nominate a cluster of sites, it responds better to the landscape approach that is needed for any species to survive. So we'll also be leveraging the World Heritage Cluster nomination process to bring this additional layer of security to those sites. It also boosts local community incomes, because once these areas are designated World Heritage sites, you attract more tourists.
That's really interesting. I love the connection with the many different, the natural and cultural heritage. That's, I think, emblematic of what you were talking about earlier with the connection, and that we're all one, and that we are all around this issue, and there's the connection to the world is really what brings us together. Back to the brown bear itself. How large can the Himalayan brown bear get? What size are we talking about?
Oh, wow. I'll have to turn to my colleague Sara Mascola for the size. I have not yet seen one in the wild. So pardon me. I've seen one on the flag of California, and I've seen one in the pictures, but I've not yet been able to travel. So if I may get you the size later. Seems pretty big from the video you saw. It
does. That is true. I've never seen one either. I know we had a couple of questions about ways to give, and I think that we'll be following up with some specific ways to give. We will be following up with everyone who's attended this presentation. So certainly we'll be in touch with more information and with those specific answers. Did want to confirm that the grizzly bears in the US are the same genetic species as the brown bears that we're talking about. I know that's been an outstanding question that I did want to reiterate there. Then there was a question. We do have a time for a couple more questions. And Sarah actually just answered us. The Himalayan brown bear are smaller than grizzlies, up to 7 feet and 1,000 pounds. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thinking about the effects of climate change, Seema, you had talked to us about expansion and population, really paying attention to the effects of climate change on the fish and food sources of the brown bear. What other efforts are we doing to address those things as part of our protection efforts? I know you spoke about the fiscal transfer and reforestation, but it seems that all of our work in India is really connected, and we're kind of getting down to that level of the interventions really helping this protection. Is that right?
Are you asking more broadly than the brown bear, Catherine? Or in the context of the brown bear?
I read both from the question as we received it from Natalie. So thank you so much for your question, Natalie. But maybe for the brown bear specifically, and then thinking about the greater expansion.
So referring back to the ecological fiscal transfer I mentioned, what we are trying to do in India is pursue top down and bottom up, which is what TNC has done everywhere, right? We often do place-based work, and then we leverage that to bring bigger change through either transforming the business practice or the policies. I mean, California is a notable example of how TNC has worked. In the case of the Himalayan brown bear, what I think we can leverage we don't need to leverage national government policy, but certainly state government policies will need to leverage. And there, I think we have to build a movement. I mean, thank you, Teddy Roosevelt. You made the teddy so attractive to children around the world. And so I think the brown bear has a natural appeal for the children. And we want to leverage that to excite, the government to take action. So that is one of the plans we have. We will begin with the local communities first, because we want to collect local folklore around the brown bears, and we want to see how we can integrate it into the school curriculum so that the positive stories about the brown bear can begin to, become part of the way the next generation is thinking. But at the same time, I think we also need a countrywide effort to leverage the brown bear for its own well-being and security, but also for a greater understanding of the wildlife and its importance. And I think brown bear is uniquely positioned to do that because of what Teddy Roosevelt did for the brown bear.
That's great. Thank you so much, Seema, for that context and how we are both working towards protection for its own right, but because there are so many other integrated impacts. Just back to your point about how we are all connected. That's actually all the time we have for questions. Thank you everyone for submitting those wonderful questions. At the end of the call, you'll all receive a short survey, which we'd appreciate you filling out. The survey will allow us to present to you the topics that are of most interest to you, our supporters. We look forward to seeing you all on Thursday, July 2nd at 11 a.m. for our next webinar, The Water Beneath Our Feet, where we'll hear from our California colleagues and learn what they're doing to protect our water sources here in California. Seema, thank you so much for this presentation today and the look inside what we're doing in India and how it does connect us all together. As you know, I just always love spending time with you and having a conversation, and so appreciate the time that you've shared with our supporters here in California.
My thanks to the California chapter and to you, Catherine, for inviting me to this seminar, and I'm grateful to everybody who attended. Thank you so much for your patient listening and caring ear.